for like 1 p.m. and then he'd finish up really quick, like maybe half an hour. And then he'd tell my grandfather to come and pick me up like 2 hours later. So I'd just be like,
you don't call those the dentist anymore. You call those the tooth fairy.
yeah, no, he was my sub-grandpa. Love that guy.
I think we have quite a lot of people in. Hopefully there'll be more joining us. Shall we kick off? Okay. I'll start off the session. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Common Ground's virtual event. Today, we're talking about gamification, empathy in design. Today, we have Sufis from Recur Consult with us to share on his knowledge on this topic. Before we start, allow me to share a little bit about Common Ground. Common Ground is one of the largest co-working spaces in Southeast Asia with a growing community, enabling more flexibility and greater networking opportunities. If you'd like to know more about Common Ground, please feel free to message me in the chat box. Also, for Common Ground members attending this session, I'll gently remind you to check your Common Ground app for weekly updates on our missions, and we appreciate your participation. I'll pass the time over to Sufis to carry on with our event.
All right, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Let's try to gauge how everyone's feeling. We had a pretty good start. We talked about really interesting things like GTA, Contra, dentistry. So let's, from a scale of 1 to 10, how are you guys feeling? So 1 being, you're falling asleep, it's been a hard day, or, you're not really driven today, or 10 being, super energetic. So just put in the chat from 1 to 10, how do you feel right now? I see an 8, that's a good start. 7 lah. Wow. There was 7, like, sounds like a 6 only, but never mind lah. I think a lah, I put it in a very positive. 7 lah. So that's pretty good. 10, that's awesome. Nothing to do with GTA. 7, 8, 4. Brian, I believe you're dialing in from Hong Kong, right? 14.
Yes, I am. It's just the day off after a long holiday, so it's definitely now just coming back to work.
Okay, that's tough. Okay, hopefully we'll lift up your spirits. I see 14. Amanda, you want to share some of that energy with us? Maybe
no,
like
it's mine.
Oh. When I was like, no, I had some good memories this morning about dentistry and things like that.
No.
6, but moving to 8. Okay, that's a big leap. It's pretty good leap. Okay, that's pretty good. So pretty good energy so far. So that's fantastic. So today we'll be talking about empathy in design. So this is the second episode of this series. There'll be another 4, hopefully, if Common Ground is happy with me and doesn't hate me for some reason. So far so good, right? So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? I hope this is the correct screen. Do you guys see the correct screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, because I have quite a few tabs open. All right. Right. So as I was saying today, we'll be talking about empathy design. So this is applicable anywhere. It doesn't have to be apps, doesn't have to be websites. It can be anything. As long as you're trying to build something, empathy has a role, right? Because unless you're building it for robots, then it doesn't matter because they don't need empathy. If you're building it for a user experience, whoever that may be, it will be relevant to them, right? Okay, so before we begin, let's set some simple house rules. Keep on your videos. I want to see your faces, right? But try to keep your mic on mute unless you're prompted to answer a question or you have a question you want to ask and it's a good time to do so. Go for it. Otherwise, keep it on mute. We had some pretty interesting background noise last time. And there's also some other events that I was in. Get comfortable. Make sure you're somewhere comfortable. You need a drink, need some snacks. Go for it. If you need to go to the toilet, don't bring us with you. That will be unless turn off your video. If you can join us on your computers, there'll be a reason for that because there'll be some things I want you guys to do that will require your mobile phones. You can use your computers for that as well. So either or is great. But if you're on your mobile, it's hard to do these things on mobile. So yeah, if you can, try to use your computer. Don't spam the chat unless it's relevant to what we're talking about. You have any questions or you're answering any questions, right? So I will be on 2 devices or 2 accounts. So you'll see that there's a Sufis chat as well. So whatever you say, I will see it in the Sufis chat account. So if you want to tell me anything directly without others knowing, so you want to be anonymous, to the rest, you can just send it directly to Sufis chat because I can see it there. On this particular account that I'm speaking on right now, I can't really see the chat without interrupting the slides, right? Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. So I'm Sufis. Don't call me Sufyan because that's my father. People call me that sometimes and it gets confusing. So this is how I look like. I think you can also see that the same person's on your video feed as well. So I'm basically a gamification behavioral design consultant. It's not a common thing to hear this role. In fact, probably never heard it. It's completely fine. It's fairly uncommon generally, especially in Malaysia. It's a bit more common-ish in Europe, but not even still then not very. So basically what it is that I work with clients to develop frameworks, right? Gamification behavioral design frameworks. It can be for anything. It could be for an app, a website, an event, a training program, whatever it may be. The idea is to build engagement and to get people to stay retained in the experience, right? So I run my own company called Rico Consult. So it's a consultation firm doing gamification behavioral design based in Malaysia. And I'm also a certified OCTALYSIS gamification practitioner. So this is basically one of the few, if not one of two, I think, complete frameworks in the industry. And I am one of 130 plus people who are certified in this. They're not many because it's quite hard to get certified in the first place. I've worked with Fortune 500s, multinationals, GLCs, SMEs. Nowadays, I work with startups a lot because startups are really fun because they are very innovative, very hungry to try new things. The rest have a lot of red tape, so I like startups. Startups are cool, but I still work with anybody. I've had the privilege of designing international award-winning solutions, right, using gamification. I don't own them. I build them for clients, and they've won awards, so that's great to see. I'm affiliated with some associations locally and abroad. They're mostly gamification related. I won't talk about this too much because you won't know who they are, and the acronyms probably make no sense anyway. I'm also a corporate trainer. So I fell into the training industry by accident. I was designing programs for training. I ended up having to deliver them and then found out that I was a pretty decent trainer, at least from what I'm told, and I had requests to continue delivering training programs. So today it's not my main focus, or as in nowadays not my main focus, but I do deliver training once in a while. So in fact, I also am delivering training programs with Common Ground for gamification behavioral design. So if you're interested to learn about gamification behavioral design, just let Common Ground or myself know, and we'll let you know when the next training program or workshop will be. Okay, right. So let's start. What do you want to gain from this talk, right? So I'm not here to just blabber on and tell you what I want you to know. I want you to tell me what you guys are interested to find out so I can at least emphasize on those points a bit more. So rather than just type things in the chat, what I'm going to do is that I want you to go to your phone or go to your browser, go to slido.com and type in the code M814 that's on the screen. Or if you're on your mobile device, just scan the QR code and it will bring you to a page where you can just answer this question. So whatever you answer there will appear here so we all can see it together, right? So please spend a bit of time to answer the question. I really want to know what you guys want to gain from this talk, right? It's supposed to be a two-way thing. And I really want to make sure that you guys get something valuable out of this. Obviously, you didn't join this because you have nothing to do. We're all busy people. We all have things to do. Even if you're not busy, I'm sure you'd rather do something else. So that means you came in for a purpose. So what's that purpose? Let's find out, right? So I'll give you guys some time to log in, to open the thing and type in some stuff. Does it have to be an essay? It can be a short sentence. It's fine. All right. Ways to make learning easier. Okay, fantastic. Create an unforgettable experience. Okay. Let's see if there's any more coming in. We will touch on this somewhat because again, we're talking about empathy specifically. How to create emotions on gamification. Okay, that's one as well. I'll give it another maybe 10 seconds to see if there's any more. I think the last one we had quite a bit, so I'll give it a bit of time. Some people type slow, maybe someone's trying to figure out how to use Slido. So ways to how to create a long-term memorable experience, create an unforgettable experience, understanding the benefits of gamification. Okay. I won't dive too much on gamification specifically. I'll be talking more on the behavioral side of things, which is why empathy is here. But I will share what I can. Okay. Stickiness. Any more? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's move on. Right. So I've heard your thoughts. So let's try to zero in on those a bit more. So before I begin, let's talk about what gamification is, right? So I won't dive into the empathy yet. Let's talk about what this thing gamification is, right? There's a lot of misconceptions going on about what gamification is about, because what happened was that about 10 years ago, there was a lot of hype on gamification. And that led to a lot of people using gamification. And what happened was that instead of consulting experts or actually doing proper research into it, they basically just applied gamification in any way they thought was correct. And that led to this phenomenon called points, badges, and leaderboards, or PBLs. And that's what people think gamification is all about. You put a point system, you put badges, you put a leaderboard, and that's gamification. And that is a form of gamification. We call it shallow gamification. Does it work? Not all the time. In fact, 90% of the time, it doesn't work, because you can't just slap game elements like that on any experience and call it gamification and expect it to give you results. You really have to zero in on what you want to achieve and what would align with those objectives, right? So gamification basically is the process of adding games or game-like elements to something so as to encourage participation. So that's why you hear things like stickiness, engagement, reducing churn, increasing retention, because that's what gamification is able to achieve if done properly, right? If you expect to achieve that by just slapping on any game element, you will not get the results unless you're very, very lucky, right? So it's always good to approach this with caution. Do be research. There's a lot of resources out there nowadays. Otherwise, you can always ask experts. You can ask me if you have a question. So if you have any questions today specific to what you're trying to build, I'm happy to answer them. So that's something that I can offer in this talk for sure. So that's basically what the definition is. But what's the difference between game and gamification? So does gamification have to look like a game? No. Do games have gamification elements? Well, in reality, yes, because gamification is elements from games in the first place, right? So a game is defined by players' interaction with the game itself. So it's a closed environment. So it's encapsulated by its own rules. It does not interact with the outside real world. So it's kind of like Vegas, what happens in the game stays in the game. Whereas gamification serves to bring an outward interaction or to encourage an outward interaction, right? So it's a means to an end. It's meant to motivate and encourage people to do something, right? So it's different from a game in that sense, because there'll be an outward interaction. There's something that happens in the real world. So they could interact with something that looks like a game, but the outcome is something that happens in the real world. So that is the clear differentiator between games and gamification, okay? So there were some questions asking about how to use gamification and things like that. I will answer this briefly, but basically, when you want to approach gamification, ask yourselves what metrics are important to you, whether it's revenue, for example, or whether it's in terms of how much time they spend on it, on an experience, or how often they return to experience, and so on and so forth. Or it could be something like encouraging volunteering. So those are some metrics you can think about that may or may not be relevant to you. And then you ask yourself, okay, how would I use gamification to get these metrics, right? Would a point system work in this case? Maybe, maybe not. So once you ask yourself that questions and you look at elements, then you begin to see a connection. And if you guys ask yourself, what elements can I use? There is no proper answer to this question, because it depends on how creative you are. If you want to see what people do in the market, you can look at online and do research. There's a lot of good case studies and examples you can follow. Or you can get creative, right? Look at what games do, or kind of see what you would like to see in the experience yourself. Anything could be gamified or a form of gamification if you know how to use it, right? Okay, so let's talk about empathy, right? So why are we using empathy in design? So we all know what empathy is. Empathy is basically thinking about people, putting yourself in their shoes. How do they feel? What do they think? It's trying to basically be more human, right? And why is this important to implement in design? And why is it not being used in design in the first place? So when you understand the people you're trying to reach and the design from their perspective, not only will you arrive at unexpected answers, but you'll come up with ideas that they'll embrace. So this is from IDEO. So IDEO, if you know who they are, but if you don't, they're basically one of the leading consultancies in the world for design thinking and design in general, right? They've done a lot of great work. I actually got certified by them in some areas as well. So empathy tends to relate to design thinking a lot, right? So if you don't know what design thinking is, it's about making something very human-centric as well, right? So what is what is the difference between human-centered versus functional design? So when you talk about design, it tends to lean towards functional design a lot, right? When you think about, okay, you want to build something, you think about the technical aspect, the functional aspect of the design. So like when you think about a car, you think about how fast it goes, how comfortable it is, how much horsepower or whatever. If you're a car person, you understand what these things mean. If you talk about a phone, for example, you talk about the specs of a phone, how much RAM, what's the camera like, and things like that. So these are all very functional in nature. So the human-centered aspect is more about what people think, how they feel, and how they behave, right? So it's about approaching problem solving using creativity, and it involves the end user from the very beginning and places them at the center of the design process, right? So it doesn't have to be digital, it can be any design process. The idea is that you think about the user, right? How would they feel using something? What would they think about this? Would they enjoy the experience or not? So the most common example or reference that people use is Apple. It's a bit overused, but it's still a good reference. The reason why they stood out from the crowd is because they focus on the user experience more than the functional design. Sure, the functional design was sound. They had a good OS and it was easy to run on their own platforms, and it was a closed system, so they could control it. So they could build whatever they wanted. So they chose to optimize the user experience as much as possible, where everybody else was chasing features, right? Back then, they were chasing like how many megapixels you could fit into a camera. And actually, that didn't matter. It just sounded nice on paper, but nobody really cared about it in real life, because if the photo looks good, that's all that matters, right? So that's a clear difference between functional and human-centered design. Functional design, by definition, is basically focusing on function rather than aesthetics. It's a concern with objectives rather than components. So the end user is not usually represented in the design process, because they think about, okay, let's cram as much features as we can, right? How do we make it more technologically advanced? And I work with a lot of clients, especially developers, and they're very technical people. And they say like, look, we built a lot of features. We put in like blockchain, we put in like machine learning, AI, blah, blah, blah. But people don't like using it. Why? It's because they forget the empathy in the design, right? So let's talk about that a bit more and why it's important to have empathy. So one key reason is because you want to reduce or remove cognitive friction, right? So this occurs when a user is confronted with an interface or affordance that appears to be intuitive, but delivers unexpected results. Basically, they had an expectation of something because they hear about all the good things, right? Oh, it has a lot of features. It has a lot of high specs. It has this, this and that. And then when they use it, they get frustrated. There's a mismatch with the expectations, with the actual experience. And this will, in the end, impair their user experience and jeopardize it in the end, right? So we talked about, we're talking about something at the beginning about certain app where, they have all the features that the users would want, but because it had some bugs or had some poor user interface experience or whatever it may be, it led to people not wanting to use it. So despite having improvements from that point on, people didn't trust the experience as much anymore. So they were not willing to give it a shot, right? So this is very important, because what has happened is cognitive friction has occurred. And when people don't like the experience, they will move away. And especially in today's world, when there's so many alternatives and replacements you can have in the market, some are free, you have to really make it a point to get their first impression correct early on, right? First impressions are very important. If they don't like the experience in the first instance, they will go somewhere else, right? Or you will lose their trust entirely. So by managing cognitive friction, you can avoid that from happening to your experience as well. So how do you manage this? So there are three things that you have to keep in mind, right? So usually people focus on the tech a lot, maybe the social, because they want them to do certain social interactions in a certain experience, whether it's to talk to people or to collaborate with people, to compete with others, or so on and so forth, right? So you talk about social media, for example, that's a lot of social elements. You get to see people interacting online, you get to see what people say, you get to interact and react to that, you get to share things with other people. So there's a lot of social elements. But one thing that you want to also keep in mind in the activity or the experience is the human side, right? So who are they? What are they here for? What do they feel? What do they think? And how does the tech and the social aspect kind of bring everything together. So you have to balance all these elements together to some extent. If you have one but not the other, you may not have the proper experience. So, but one thing stays true is that if you do not have the human side, everything else will not be able to work properly, right? You can do well with human and social because that's what we do on the daily, right? We talk to people, we interact with others, and that doesn't always have to have a tech aspect involved. But you have a good way to incorporate tech in all this together, then you have a very good experience, right? So I wanted to give you one example, right? This is a very good example of something that was designed with the user in mind. So this is FUJI Kindergarten, was designed by a renowned architectural designer named Kashiwa Sato. Obviously he's Japanese, and he had this innovative project for this kindergarten, right? So they had to rebuild this kindergarten from scratch, and he wanted to make it a gigantic playground. So the kindergarten itself was a playground. It wasn't like associated with being a school that was, say, boring, or an education institution that was drab and uninteresting. It was supposed to be fun, right? You look at it, it looks interesting, it looks appealing, and you feel drawn to it because of the design. So it was meant to be a medium to foster every child's creativity. Because children, if you look into the research of children and how they learn and whatnot, or if you have kids of your own, then you understand that the best way to teach is actually through fun. Playing is a form of learning for children. Playing isn't just entertainment. Whatever they do, whether it's playing pretend and all that, it's kind of them simulating what they feel is the real world. And by them approaching a safe medium to practice these realities in their heads, they get to learn things a lot faster, right? So he wanted to bring this into architectural form. So he built a circular building with a wooden roof, and children can basically run and play on this circular roof whenever they wanted. So when was the last time you heard of people going on a roof to play, right? So this was maximizing every inch of the space. And the middle area was allocated to be a communal space, right? So there's an element of togetherness. So you encourage them to be together, to interact and talk to each other, to play together in this middle space, because the circular space doesn't mean everyone can be in the same space at the same time, because you can have kids running all over the place, right? But the middle space is to bring them together. So they also had building equipment for them to play on the roof, and they also had things like a slide or a rope ladder to go bring them up and down. So it became a very interesting way to go up and down to different floors. So if they have to go back to the learning environment, they can slide down. It's fun. So it's like, oh, I can. It's not like they don't drag their feet to go back to class, because it's fun, right? And they have interesting water drainage system they can play with. So all these things was all about play, right? It's to allow them to interact with the environment and learn at the same time, whether it's by talking or playing with other kids or with the teachers, or making it fun to go back to class and all that. So this was designed with the kids in mind, right? And this is not even touching on the actual training or learning that they do in the classroom, right? And this is just the environment. So even when you come to this space, you feel enticed by it and you want to play. And you don't even have to tell them to do it, and they will do it. And that's where good design occurs. Because when you know that you feel compelled to do something without being told to do it, that's when you know that the design has achieved what it's intended to do. If you have to put a sign on the board and say, this is where you play, then you know that design is not very optimal, because they don't really get the impression that it has to be done that way without it being told through a sign or whatever it may be, right? So if it's automated or it becomes a very natural feeling, then you know that design has achieved what it has. And to do this, you must have empathy. Why? Because you know how kids are, for example, in this situation, you know how they behave. You give them an environment where they will thrive. They like to run, give them a space to run. They like to play, give them toys to play with. They like to slide around, climb things, give them things to climb and slide. So you make it more for them, not for the teachers. I'm sure the teachers also had fun. And because we are all children at heart, right? Okay, so this brings us to the next point. It's about understanding your users, right? So to be able to create an experience that is empathetic, you must know who your users are. So let's draw a line. So we talked about human-centered design earlier, right? What about user-centered design? What is the difference? They've been used interchangeably in UX design, but there are similarities, but there's one main difference, right? So human-centered design is about looking at human psychology and perception, right? You want to understand what people respond to naturally, what the psychology, what are their behaviors. But user-centered design is about bringing that one step further, which is understanding who your target audience is, because every person is different, right? Children are different children will behave differently as well. we are as well, even though we fit the same demographic, for example, you could be the same age group, living in the same environment, having the same income, whatever it may be, but you could be fundamentally different people, right? So if you were to use demographics to segmentize your users, you might have a lot of trouble understanding how they behave, because demographics don't tell you about the psychology or the human aspect of their behaviors, right? Because humans are not rational. If you use demographics, for example, oh, they are this age group, that's why they would behave this way. In reality, it's not so clear cut, right? Humans are not rational in nature. We rationalize. We're not rational. So by understanding who they are at a more organic or a more human level, you are able to cater or develop user experiences that cater to them a bit more specifically, right? Which is user-centered design. So you want to understand the specific traits and features your target users have. So then you will know how to build an experience or product that will be very in tune with them as users, okay? Right, so how do you do this? You can use something called an empathy map. So an empathy map basically will profile your users in terms of what they say, how they think, what they do, and how they feel, right? So what they say is pretty straightforward. So what do they actually say out loud, not keep in their head? What they think is basically what would they think throughout the experience, right? What goes through their mind? What thoughts occur? It could be anything, and you'd be surprised what they think about. So if you don't ask, you don't know. And usually when we design things, if you don't want to go through this process, you make assumptions. And then when they don't fit those assumptions, you feel like, oh, there's a disconnect in the experience. The physical actions that the user takes, what do they actually do? So for example, when they're on an app, how do they actually open the app? When do they open the app? What do they press? What do they look at? What do they do on the actual app? So these are things that you want to keep track. There's a lot of tools out there they can use, heat maps and things like that, for example, for websites and apps. But again, it's all about looking at what they do physically. And lastly, is about how do they feel? What's the emotional state? So when you use this, for example, what you want to do is at every point of the experience that you're trying to build, you want to sit down and ask your user, if you have a user that you can reach out to, or at least a focus group of sorts, ask them like what they're thinking about, observe what they do, observe what they say, and ask them how they feel, right? And then make these observations and plot them on a chart, for example, at different points of the experience, right? And then you are able to see at what points of the experience that they do not enjoy, right? They say certain things that indicate they're not enjoying it, they don't behave in the way you want them to, or their emotional states is not positive. They feel uncomfortable, they feel frustrated, they feel angry, they feel unhappy. Then you want to identify what happened in the experience and how you can fix it, right? Most often when we build things, we don't look at this at all, right? We build something and then we like it. We say, oh, you like it now? What do you think? And sometimes people say, oh, it looks okay. It feels all right. And then you roll with it, right? You launch the experience and then you find out that you don't get the results you want. So if you can incorporate this in the design process, and you'll be surprised what you find, right? So this is one example. I didn't make this, of course. I found this online. So basically, this is a profile. This is a fictional person called Jamie. So what this person says is this, or I was expecting something different. What do you think? What size is best? Blah, blah, blah. What they think is, do they think I'm stupid? What is best for me? I want something awesome. What they do is, for example, they list pros and cons. They do more research. They observe what's happening. They ask their friends. And then what they feel is maybe they feel excited, overwhelmed, and so on. So you can see there's a lot of things happening here, right? That means depending on the point of the experience they're in, they will feel different things. And when you see this, you want to know, okay, when did they feel excited and when did they feel unhappy or fearful or anxious? Because there's clearly something wrong with the experience, right? And you want to fix it. So then the next question will be, once you've fixed everything, how do you motivate them to do something, right? So when you talk about gamification, motivation tends to be a very common question. So, and the most common thing that people do when it comes to motivating them is to give them rewards. And what kind of rewards? It tends to be something like money, discounts, vouchers, which tends to work until it doesn't work. Okay, so let's talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So when you understand the users, you will also understand what motivates them, right? Whether you want to use more intrinsic or extrinsic or a bit of both. So the main difference between the two is that intrinsic motivation is internally rewarding. So they do something because it's fun, enjoyable, and satisfying, right? And maybe they have a goal in mind, and the goal is from within, right? It usually satisfies the person's basic psychological needs. for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So we'll talk about autonomy, competence, and relatedness later. That is actually part of a theory. If you know what it is, then you know. I'll share. If you don't, then you'll find out later. Whereas extrinsic motivation is about external rewards, right? So it's about an outcome, and it doesn't satisfy their psychological needs at all. It is about external gains. It could be money, it could be fame, it could be power, it could be anything, right? So extrinsic motivation tends to be the go-to for people because it's very obvious how it looks like. And when you say extrinsic motivation, you can think about what those are already, right? And if you find yourself trying to get people engaged with the experience by giving them things, right? You give them money, you give them vouchers, you give them benefits, and you find that it becomes unsustainable in the long term, then you're in for some trouble, right? Because what I've seen, especially with my clients, is that they say that, look, Sufis, I've been using gamification on my own before I approached you. And at first it worked, but now I'm having trouble keeping it up and people are not interested anymore. Why? Is because aside from the points, values, and leaderboards I talked about earlier, is because the rewards they give are extrinsic, right? Or for them, I want them to do this, right? So I give them an iPhone as a prize, or I give them money, or I give them vouchers. And then over time, right, it becomes one of two things, or both. One is that it becomes unsustainable for the business to keep up with the rewards because it's expensive, right? They are not getting their returns financially. They're getting engagement, but they're not getting the monetary returns in exchange for the rewards they give. Or people lose interest in the rewards. So what do they have to do? They have to give them better rewards. If you're giving them, say, $10, now you have to give them maybe $20, and then $50, and then $100. So when does it stop? When does it end? At the end of the day, if you don't have the financial means to back it up, you're in trouble. But even if you do you still want to pay your users to use something or to behave in an experience? Is that really a good business model? Maybe you're better off not doing it in the first place, right? Because you could save that money to do something else. So how can you manage this? Intrinsic motivation. If you create an experience that appeals to the person's psychological needs, their intrinsic motivations and goals, you don't even have to pay them. In fact, if you do it well enough, they will pay you to be able to use the experience. And that happens if you do it correctly, right? And one question I always get is, what happens if I'm really using extrinsic motivation? How do I use intrinsic? Okay, if you have this question, I will answer you right now. If you want more clarification, ask me later. But basically, if you're already in this situation, what you do is that you reduce the extrinsic motivation slowly, but you start to introduce intrinsic motivation at the same time. You don't remove extrinsic and replace with intrinsic. What will happen is that they will lose the motivation to be engaged with experience. But then you say, but intrinsic motivation is supposed to be better, right? Yeah, but the reason why they're there in the first place is because of the extrinsic motivations, because you put it there in the first place, right? It's like kind of like, imagine you're at your job, you're getting a salary, right? And then your employer is like, you know what? I want to change your motivation. I'm going to stop giving you a paycheck. I'm going to give you something else. I'm going to give you a sense of purpose. You're not getting paid, but you're going to be psychologically, or you're going to be psychologically satisfied. You think that's enough? Probably not. The only reason why you use extrinsic motivation is to make them do something they wouldn't want to do, which is, a job. Most people, unfortunately, don't enjoy their jobs. They have to get paid a certain amount. That's why you get increments, right? Even if you enjoy your job and you get a good paycheck, that's great. You have both motivations in check. But you only have one, then you make sure it's extrinsic motivation, because intrinsic motivation doesn't feed you. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, I kind of gave this away, but which do you think is more important, extrinsic or intrinsic motivation? In worst situations, what do you think is best, right? Let's see what your thoughts are. I'm expecting to say intrinsic more, but you might have a different opinion. Extrinsic motivation, 100%. Oh, started off with a, okay, I didn't expect that. Okay, so extrinsic motivation or intrinsic motivation is more important, right? So are you willing to get paid for it more, or are you willing to be intrinsically motivated with something, say, epic meaning and calling? So I still say extrinsic. So that's quite interesting. Even though I've explained the differences and the benefits of intrinsic, I still see people choosing extrinsic motivation. Are you guys mixing up the two? Or are we really seeing a divide in terms of, oh no, extrinsic is still best, I'd rather still get money? So we'll talk about this a bit more. So 3 answers so far. Anybody else want to give a go? Nobody has chosen intrinsic motivation, and I'm actually quite worried. Nobody else? Okay, I see some intrinsic coming in. I think majority still chooses extrinsic motivation. Okay. Okay, so I'll give it 10 more seconds if I see anybody else want to answer. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Maybe because we're basic. You're like money hungry people or something. Okay, I'm just kidding. Honestly, extrinsic motivation, it's important. But if you're trying to build an experience, say you're trying to get people to go to your app or stay on your website a bit more, if you find that extrinsic motivation is the way to go, then you might have you're going to have some trouble keeping up with the business, right? So let's talk about why external motivation may not be the best way to go. Doesn't mean you shouldn't use external motivation. I'm just saying don't rely only on external motivation. Even when you're paying your employees a paycheck, it doesn't mean you shouldn't engage them with intrinsic motivation. It's still important because you want them to be happy at their workplace, right? So it occurs when over-justification effect basically occurs when an external incentive decreases a person's intrinsic motivation, right? So basically, if you are motivated to do something without having any monetary reward, like volunteering, for example, right? When you volunteer, you don't get paid. Sometimes you even pay to volunteer, right? You've heard of stories people traveling to, say, Africa or other countries that need help. They're actually paying for this, right? They're paying for their accommodation, they're paying for their flight, they're paying for this access to be able to go and volunteer for these people. So they're basically paying to do work, right? And they don't even get benefit from this work, they only get satisfaction. And that is the beauty of volunteering. If you think about, say, Wikipedia, for example, Wikipedia is the largest encyclopedia in the world, and it's driven purely by volunteers, right? You don't get paid if you put anything on Wikipedia. You don't get paid if you check or make sure that everything written is correct. And at the same time, if you actually go to Wikipedia and you go to a Wikipedia page and you put in a wrong, say you just edit, because you can edit it, right? You put something wrong inside the page. You put something fake. You'll be surprised when you come back, it probably fixed. And whoever did that did it for free. And that's because they're intrinsically motivated. They feel a sense of purpose. They feel a sense of satisfaction because they're doing it because it's bigger than themselves and other motivations involved, right? And what happens is that if you were to replace that motivation with, say, money, right? Or some sort of reward or prize. Say you're a volunteer. Suddenly I say, look, I really like what you're doing with this work. I'm going to pay you for it. What will happen is that you will diminish the intrinsic motivation. And so much research has shown that when you do this, what will happen is that people are not willing to volunteer anymore. Because one or two things happen, right? They've observed either one, if you give them a certain amount, they feel that, oh, you're cheapening my contribution, right? Even if you give them $100, they feel like, you know what, whatever I did is worth more than $100. I feel that I'm not getting paid. I'm not getting the amount that's kind of matching the value I'm providing. So I feel a bit cheated, and then I'm less inclined to volunteer, at least volunteer for this cause again. Or another case is that, oh, now that I'm getting paid, I'm not going to volunteer unless I get paid because I'm so used to getting paid now, right? And that affects the volunteers and how much people volunteer in the long term, right? That's why whenever you want to give rewards to volunteers, you have to be very careful what you do, okay, and how you reward them in the first place. So this is over-justification effect. Okay, so we talked about autonomy, competence, and relatedness earlier, right? So that's actually part of self-determination theory. So self-determination theory, it's about motivation. It's a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And it's commonly used, especially when you want to create something that's engaging and motivating. And the idea is that autonomy is basically about creating something where people feel that they have control over their situation. Because people like to be the masters of their own destiny, right? You don't like to be told what to do. You like autonomy, right? And autonomy is very important so that you have a sense of control over your own behavior. You feel like a human being because you're not being told what to do. You're not a robot, right? Competence, on the other hand, is about giving them a chance to kind of upskill themselves or achieve something or earn knowledge, right? So they have to put in effort to build their competence or develop mastery to be better at something, right? Because they feel challenged. They feel like, oh, I feel better, or I feel like I'm gaining some sort of skill by doing this particular thing. And relatedness is basically having a sense of belonging and connectedness with others. So you have it's a social aspect of motivation. You know, you feel a degree of connectivity with other people. You know, that's why you like to talk to people, especially if you're an extrovert. You like to be around people because they give you a sense of purpose or energy, right? So these three are basically forms of intrinsic motivation. They can be turned into extrinsic, but they're by nature intrinsically motivated. Because if you create an environment where you give them freedom, or you give them a chance to challenge themselves or build competence or build their skill in something, or you give them a sense of belonging with a social element involved, you give them motivation to stay or be engaged with an experience or environment, right? And these are all without paying them a single cent, right? No vouchers involved, no discounts involved, no money involved. You just give them what a human being needs, right? So if you're able to incorporate these three into an experience, you are able to basically tap into their intrinsic motivators quite effectively, right? Example, if you wanted to build autonomy, you give them freedom to build things or explore or do things, right? So whether it's, if you think about sandboxes or things like Canva or whatever it may be, right? They're able to build whatever they want or design things however they feel or see fit, without being told that's wrong, right? There's no way, it's up to them to explore. There's autonomy in that process. Competence, it could be, for example, there is a challenge, right? You know, people go for fitness challenges and things like that. They don't get paid. In fact, they pay to go for these things, right? You're paying to basically put yourself through a lot of stress. You know, you can get injured, you can get heat stroke, whatever, but you're paying for it, right? And you enjoy the experience, which is very weird. Usually it's kind of like physical labor, but you're paying for it instead. And it's because of this, you want to build up your skill, you know, your physical abilities, your skill in certain things, you know, and people feel motivated to do this. And relatedness is because it's like you're paying to be around other people, right? That's why you pay to go out and eat with people. You want to meet your friends, you go for social events, you pay to go for pay for certain access to social environments and things like that, because you want to be around people. Even introverts want to be around people. It's just that they just need a little less compared to extroverts, but it is what it is, right? Humans are social creatures. So by understanding the basic needs of human beings on a psychological level, you're able to build an experience that will be able to be empathetic in that sense, right? So another way to look at motivations is the OCTALYSIS framework. So if you join my last talk, I actually showed this slide as well. I use this a lot because it's something I'm certified in as well. And this is something I feel is most complete in terms of motivation. And in fact, the self-determination theory that we shared earlier is already embedded in this and a lot more. So they're basically 8 core drives of human motivation. And depending on who your users are, they are motivated by a mix of this. Not all 8, unlikely all 8, but a mix of it. It could be 4 of it, 3 of it, 5 of it, whatever it may be. How do you know? You have to understand who your users are. Okay, so going to this framework, basically the 8 core drives, the first one is epic meaning calling. So you give them a sense of purpose, or you make them feel like they were chosen. They were the chosen ones to do something, right? This could be, for example, volunteering. They're doing something for others. It's not about themselves. So epic meaning and calling is doing something not for you, but because of something greater. And development accomplishment is the same as competence that we talked about earlier. You're giving them a chance to progress or develop their skills or competence by overcoming challenges or difficulties, right? They want to improve themselves in some way, right? And that was competence that we shared earlier. Empowerment, creativity, and feedback. This is actually autonomy to some extent. This is basically giving them the freedom to express themselves and explore things creatively, right? To get some sort of feedback. Ownership and possession, this already starts going to territory of extrinsic motivation, where you get them to, you learn to collect something, feel that they own something, whether it could be points, it could be money, it could be possessions. They have a sense of ownership. Social influence is what we talked about earlier with social, right? You want to be around people. It could be competition, it could be friendship, it could be mentorship, it could be whatever, right? As long as there's people involved, there's a social aspect to it. That is social influence. The next bit is scarcity, right? Having less of something. Humans are weird. When there's less of something, we want it more. It's because of our innate need to survive, right? because when you have less of something, you feel like it's more desirable because maybe you need it to survive and you're not sure. You just get it just in case, right? Or I don't know what it's for, but because it seems that everybody wants it and there's not much of it left, I better take it just in case I need it, right? So you want something because you can't have it. Unpredictability and curiosity, on the other hand, is you don't know what's going to happen next. This could be a good or a bad thing. It could be you're curious, like a cliffhanger in a story, or you want to know what happens next. Or it's unpredictable, it's uncertain. You don't know what happens next. You feel uncomfortable, right? You could be in danger. You could be in trouble. So these are motivations in two different directions, right? Positive and negative. And the last one is loss and avoidance. This is very powerful and it's also very painful. If you use this correctly, it will do wonders for you. If you do too much of this, you will cripple the user in the sense where they feel traumatized or they feel completely defeated by the experience and they will leave entirely, right? So this is basically avoiding something negative happening. One example I can think of is, if you know an app called Duolingo, it's basically a language learning app. It's very popular. It uses a lot of gamification. One of the elements they used to have, which they don't have it anymore, is they would have a streak, right? So if you log in every day for like, say, 100 days or 300 days or 10 days or whatever, you'll gain a streak. But if you don't log in for one day after that, you will lose your streak. And when you lose your streak, it's incredibly painful to start back from zero, right? And you lose a lot of benefits that go with it. But to regain this streak, you have to pay them money to gain it back. What happens is that when they lose their streak and they get punishment like this, they will feel fed up and feel like, oh, this is too much to bear. I'm going to just not use this anymore. So they actually lost a lot of users because of that, right? So be careful. You can warn them about losing things, but you have to give them a fair way to regain it as much as possible. If you take advantage of it by putting a price tag, then you might rub the users the wrong way because it's not empathetic. You basically take advantage of the situation, right? But it's up to you because that's ultimately about how you want to design the experience. But be careful on how you use that particular motivator. Okay, so these are 8 core drives. If you want to build something, look at these 8 and ask yourself, okay, which 8 do I want to use? Which one would be relevant to me and my user? In fact, if you ask yourself, right, which one would you resonate with? You can already tell that, oh, some of them make sense to me, some of them don't. And when you talk to somebody else, they will give you a different answer because everybody is different. And again, if you look at demographics as a way to segmentize your users, you will not be able to get this answer. You must have some form of empathy and you must understand your users, okay? Right, so let's go into the last phase, which is designing the user journey. So when you want to design a journey, what you have to keep in mind, right? So basically there are 4 phases of the user journey. The first one is discovery. So when they fall into experience, they find out about it the first time. Onboarding, scaffolding, and mastery and endgame. I'll talk about this a bit more after this. So basically, when you understand that when a user goes into something, they actually go through a journey automatically. So you want to make sure that whatever you design caters to this user journey. Because if you don't cater to this, you will find that the users will not know how to use it or will not feel comfortable using the experience because they find it's too difficult, they don't understand it, and then they will leave. So you must cater the user's journey based on these 4 phases as much as possible. There might be different forms, but essentially you must have these 4 elements in some shape, way, or form, right? The first one is basically discovery. This is when they fall into experience the first time. So they find the experience or they learn about the experience. It could be through word of mouth. It could be through marketing and all that. So it's crucial that you give them the right impression here, right? And you must give them a good reason to start. So why are they going to try your app or website or go to your store or whatever? What is it that's compelling about the messaging, right? You have to give them a reason. That's why value is important. And so we talked about earlier a little bit about if you have trouble getting people to use your app, you have to understand whether the fundamentals of the app or your product is good in the first place. If it's not solving a problem they care about, they're not going to come because it's like, what for? I'm not so free that I'm going to download a random app, for example, or go to a random website just because, unless it's something of value for me, right? And you must communicate that through the proper messaging, usually through marketing, right? So that's when they discover your experience. So once they discover it, they come into the experience, you immediately go into the onboarding phase, which is learning the basic rules and skills on how to use it. So what does it mean to use this? How does it work? What are these buttons? What are these features? How does it mean? What does it mean to me? How does it work? How do I use it, right? So as soon as they sign up for the experience, they will automatically go into onboarding, right? And this only ends when you are proficient in the experience. They know how to use the basic features already, right? And it's important to make this as seamless as possible. We talked about cognitive friction earlier, right? You want to make sure that this part has zero cognitive friction as much as possible, because if they feel uncomfortable, which means they feel stupid using the experience. Because if they don't know how to use it, they feel stupid, and nobody likes to feel stupid, right? When you feel uncomfortable, you'll be more inclined to leave the experience and never come back, because your last impression of the experience was uncomfortable, and you don't go to uncomfortable things unless you have no choice, right? So it's important to keep them motivated throughout the experience, because you want to make sure that they feel that they are getting the right boost in motivation throughout, because learning is difficult. So you want to motivate them as much as possible. How? You lean back to those 8 core drives that I talked about earlier. Okay. Okay, scaffolding is basically where they do most of the experience, right? So whatever you want to put in experience would actually appear here. This is the main features of the experience. It could be, for example, you want them to write things, you want them to create things, you want them to buy something, and whatever it may be. It's all happening here, right? And this is when you must introduce some sort of rewards. And again, it doesn't have to be monetary rewards. It could be extrinsic or intrinsic rewards. Intrinsic being being a bit more prioritized, because intrinsic, if you have intrinsic, you're able to drive anything. But extrinsic will help give them a bit more boost if they need some sort of reward, right? Depending on what you're trying to build. If it's, say, an experience like volunteering, then extrinsic may not be important. And basically, whatever you want them to do, the desired actions you want to see should appear here, right? So for example, if you want them to give you certain information, it should happen here. If you want them to, for example, give certain feedback, it should happen here, and so on and so forth. And this is something that will occur over and over again, right? So the actions that happen here will be repetitive. So then you should ask yourself, how do you make them come back over and over again to do the same things, right? So this could be approached in different ways depending on what you're trying to develop, right? You might want to make things slightly more difficult over time so they don't get bored and they feel adequately challenged, or you want to make sure that whatever they do has always a novelty experience, right? For example, like if it's a creative environment where they build things, then you want to give them more things to build with, or you want to give them freedom to keep building new and new things, because it will always be a different thing for them. And remember, rewards are important, but be mindful what rewards you give. If you incline to give extrinsic rewards, there are dangers that we talked about earlier. It may not be sustainable, and you may attract the wrong kinds of people, right? The ones who are looking for intrinsic motivations, if they don't find it in your experience, they will leave. Okay. Right. And the last bit is endgame or mastery. Depending on what you're trying to build, there might be an endgame, which means it ends and nothing else. Or if it's something that continues on forever, then you want to give them a way to be a master of the experience, which is they become kind of like your ambassadors, or they become advocates of the experience, because they know everything, the experience, they've done everything at least once. They want to get other people involved with the experience, right? So for example, like Facebook. Facebook is something that never ends. I'm sure you all have Facebook accounts or have had Facebook accounts at least. Maybe you're on a digital detox or something. But you notice that there's no end to Facebook, right? Sure, it keeps evolving. But as a user, there's nothing that happens after that. What happens instead is that you become a master of the experience, right? You've done everything, you know what to expect from it, you know what to do. You maybe introduce it to people who don't use Facebook. When you hear someone who's never used Facebook, you're like, you don't have Facebook? It's like, how do you not have Facebook? And then you kind of get them curious and they join Facebook. So you become an advocate or ambassador. Or you end up doing more things in Facebook. For example, you start making your own groups, or you start setting up a business on Facebook, or you become a moderator for a group on Facebook. All these things lead to becoming somewhat of an authority or some sort of power in Facebook in some shape, way, or form, because you become a proficient user of the experience. Okay. Right. So we're actually towards the end. I think this is the last key slide. So this is about emotional journey mapping, right? So basically, this is similar to what we talked about earlier about the empathy map, where you want to basically understand the emotional bit more. So when you want to kind of test the experience with users or with a focus group or volunteers or whatever it may be, you want to basically ask or do certain things. So One, you want to know who your users or customers are, and you want to put them in a certain situation or scenario. For example, like, oh, you're using your app, right? If it's an e-commerce app, for example, you give them a scenario, like, oh, no, you're looking for a daily necessity, or you're looking for a present for a friend, or whatever it may be. And then you define the actions and step within the scenario. So you kind of have an idea of that. Okay, when they want to go into the app, they have to go to the search bar and look for an item, or they'll scroll through the selection of items, and so on and so forth. And then you determine the highs and lows regarding user friendliness, right? So there could be a scale, or there could be some way to measure this, right? It could be through a questionnaire, it could just be through observation. You want to know what they're experiencing is good or bad, and at what points of the experience. And then you kind of create a chart or a line to see what goes up, what goes down. If it's up, that means they're happy. If it goes down, that means they're not. And then you find out what are the low points of the journey and find out what happens, why, and how you can improve on this, right? So it all boils down to understanding your users, what motivates them. And when you understand users, it's really understanding them as a person, not as a number, right? They're not numbers on a spreadsheet. They're actually human beings, and every person is different, right? So you want to understand them as much as possible. And then when you are trying to develop or build an experience, you want to know, okay, are they enjoying experience? What parts do they enjoy and what parts do they not enjoy? Are they adequately motivated? Do we have the right motivations and rewards, right? Are they intrinsically motivated? Are they extrinsically motivated? Are we lacking any motivations? And so on and so forth. When you have all these things in check, you're able to provide a very empathetic experience to the user. Okay, so that actually ends our session. I think, yeah, we're pretty much right on the dot. It's 11:58. I'm glad we didn't go overboard, but I think we have enough time for questions, right? So you've learned quite a bit. I've summed it up just now. So do you guys have any questions, any burning questions or anything that comes to mind, right? So if you have any questions, just scan this QR code. Again, we'll do this on slido.com so that everybody can see it. Or if you're really lazy to put it here, you can put it in the chat and I can have a look there as well. As long as other people can see it, that'll be great. But yeah, any questions about whether it's about empathy in design or about gamification as a whole, or maybe something you're struggling with when it comes to design work. So anything of the sort, you can ask here. I'll be here for the next 5 to 10 minutes. As long as there's questions, I'll be here to answer them. If not, then we can probably end the session shortly after. So any questions for us? Anybody have any questions? Why has everybody disappeared? What are the use cases that you've seen that has those elements that you mentioned? Okay, I'm guessing the elements I'm mentioning is the empathy stuff, right? About talking about the different kinds of motivations and all that. So there's a lot actually. In fact, those experiences are probably ones you're already encountering, like social media, for example. Think about, let's go back to Facebook, because everybody knows Facebook, right? Do you pay to use Facebook? Do you get paid to use Facebook? No. Obviously, you are the product. You are the data they collect is what they sell to advertisers, and they make money off of that. But what keeps you engaged on Facebook? Why have you used Facebook, for example, so many years? Like I've had my Facebook account for, I don't know, a decade maybe, and you don't even realize it's been so long. And it's because they're actually really good at behavioral design. And not to say they have empathy per se, but they know how to make sure that you enjoy the experience and there's empathetic elements to keep you coming back, right? For example, there's a lot of social aspects. You can collect things that make you stick to the experience. And then they know that whoever you are, you will have different interests, right? That's why when you go into Facebook, you'll see things that will be relevant to you, right? They give you content that you like because they have the AI to collect that data and churn out the information that you like or content that you like, right? So in that sense, it is empathetic and it uses technology to do so, right? So you don't have to put in things that, oh, I want to look at, I don't know, cute animals, or I want to look at video game related stuff or fashion related stuff. They just do it for you, right? You don't have to say anything. Whatever you click, whatever you spend time on, they will know that, oh, you tend to spend a lot of time on this stuff. Let's show you more of the stuff so that you will spend more time here, and so on and so forth, right? When creating a learning and training system for our colleagues, how do you balance what the company wants and what our colleagues may want? Okay, so this is a question in the chat. Okay, so this boils down to two things. So what your company wants basically would be the metrics that you have to define the metrics based on what your company wants. Because at the end of the day, it is a business initiative. So you want to define the metrics as much as possible. And it shouldn't be just about, oh, I want to make money. Okay, then the question is, how do you want to make money, for example, right? You have to really get to the details. And for example, it could be like, oh, how another metric could be, I want people to upskill themselves so that they deliver better performance, and so on and so forth. So kind of align with the company or your business what those metrics are. And then you want to then ask yourself, okay, now I know the metrics, then what do I want people to do in this environment? Do I want them to say, spend more time in the learning experience? Do I want them to answer more questions? Do I want them to apply the lessons outside the training, and so on and so forth? Then those are considered the desired actions or behaviors that you want to see. Then to motivate these people to do those behaviors, you have to ask yourself, okay, who are the people, who are the employees or colleagues, for example, that you have in the experience, and how would they be motivated to do these behaviors, right? Then you go back to those motivations, those 8, and then ask yourself, okay, are they motivated by, say, extrinsic motivation or intrinsic motivations like social or autonomy or collecting things or whatever it may be? So all these things, if you define it and understand your users as much as possible, you're able to create an experience that connects those 2 dots very easily, right? Because if your company says, no, I want a platform that, a training platform or system that has a lot of quizzes, ask them why. What metric does it intend to fulfill? If there's nothing that it tends to fulfill, then it's fluffy, right? Because if the element that you put in has no purpose, whether it's for the business or for the user, it has no business being there in the first place, right? So you have to align with the company and set the metrics, and then elements come in later. If you focus on the elements first, which is what everyone tends to do, and then you expect it to hit your business objectives, it will not happen unless you get very lucky, right? 99% of the time, it won't happen, right? So again, metrics first, desired actions after, and then you talk about who the users are and what elements to put in after. How would you use gamification for lead generation? Okay, so for lead generation, it's either you want to bring in quality leads, or you want to prospect leads and give them more value. So I'm guessing it's more about qualifying leads, so you get more leads coming in. So this is all about value, right? If you say a sales company and you want to use gamification to motivate your users or your employees to look for more leads, there's a lot of example, 100% quality leads. I'm wondering this is the same person. Okay, so there's a few ways you can approach it. One is by giving more value. So if you give value or make sure that they understand there's value to get from engaging with your product or service, then they will come, right? And this could be optimized based on the way you put the messaging and the way you design the value proposition, right? If it is empathetic in the sense where you know what your users or customers want, and you put that in the forefront of the messaging, then they will come. That's the way it is, right? I can tell you most of the clients I get, I actually don't look for them. They come to me, right? In fact, I think 70-80% of my clients, they come to me, right? I don't look for them. And when they come to me, most oftentimes, I don't even have to convince them. All they want to know is, when do we start? And then we just go for it. And it's all because I make it clear as to what I'm offering, what I can do for them, and then the rest is history, right? But if you're trying to motivate your employees to look for leads, then you have to make sure that they're intrinsically motivated and extrinsically motivated. Because people who do sales, they tend to be doing it for money, right? But there is a danger if you do only extrinsic motivation, because it can create a very toxic and competitive environment. It's good for the business, yeah, but it's not good for the employees, and you have you have a high turnover rate. And then when you have to hire more people, you have to train them again, it becomes costly in the long term. What you want is you want people to be happy there and bringing you leads as much as possible, right? And it all boils down to understanding what motivates them. And usually salespeople, they like challenges, right? You give them a challenge, and you can even make it so that they are able to do it with a colleague. So they become more of a team effort. So then they are willing to share, right? Their approach. You know, when I did this to get a client, it worked out really well. Maybe it worked for you as well. And when everybody shares their resources and their input and their knowledge, everybody improves together and everybody benefits together. So you want to create that environment. So when I used to manage my own sales team in a previous role that I had, I would not use commission. I had a very little commission. Most of it was in the basic, but I made sure they were motivated intrinsically, right? They were heard, they were given the right resources, they were given the right tools, they were motivated, and they worked together, right? So they could lean on each other, and they never felt there was a competition, right? And it led to a lot of good returns, and they were able to bring in clients without expecting high commissions. Because when you have high commissions, yeah, you'll basically have a really good salesperson. But the question is, will you get all good salespeople? Not really, because they rely on money to survive, right? So if you put all the emphasis on rewards to just their commission, and they're not able to sustain that because they don't know how to deliver, it doesn't make them a bad salesperson. It just, you don't have the right environment to create a good salesperson, right? So you want to really think about that. Okay, any more questions? Any more questions for me? Or if you have any questions you don't want to ask her, I will stay on later and you can ask after as well. Okay. So if there's no more questions, I will basically move on because I know we're already going we're going past the time already. So what's next? Okay. So this is the end of the webinar. This is the end of today's or this month's episode. If you are interested to learn more or want to want to join the next episode, you can actually most welcome, Lillian. Thank you so much for joining. So as I was saying, if you really want to find out more or kind of be on this learning journey with us, you can scan this QR code or just type in that URL, which is somewhat short, and it will bring you to a short questionnaire where you just put in your details. And if there's anything that pops up, we will send you an email and you can join the next event. Okay. If you don't want to, you don't have to sign up here. Just keep an eye on Common Grounds events, or maybe you can just follow what I post on my own channels, because I'll be also sharing whatever I'll be offering, whether it's through Common Ground or outside of Common Ground. So again, this is all for your own benefit, for you to learn if you're interested. Okay, so scan the QR code or type in the URL. Okay, most welcome, Brian. Okay, so before you leave, don't go yet. Okay, we want to take a snapshot because we need evidence that you guys are here. I'm not talking to you guys are not a bot, or you guys are actually human beings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, and I'm going to use complicated technology to take a photo of you guys, which is screenshot lah. Okay, so turn on your webcams so that we know that we're not talking to a bot. You guys are real people, and I see some familiar faces, so great to hear and see you guys here. Thank you so much for joining. And to not so familiar faces, thanks for joining as well. Nice to see your faces. Anybody else? Nobody got webcam. If you can't turn on your webcam because of maybe you're not in the right environment, or maybe you're not dressed properly or whatever, maybe that's fine. So we want to shock people. So if you guys can turn on your webcams, I'll give you guys 5 seconds to do so, and then we'll take a group photo, and then for memory's sake, right? Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to take a photo now. So smile. You guys want to do what? What did they call it? Free pose or whatever. Can go for it. Go wild.
The candidates with us.
Say that again.
Candid photo.
Oh, candid. Yeah. Okay. I think candid is like I take photos without you realizing. Okay. Go crazy. I'm really bad at this, so I'm probably still gonna do the same thing. So 3, 2, 1, go. I can't do this because I can't press the button. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, guys. I'm gonna just go back to my screen real quick, because if you guys want to stay in touch, or you guys want to just ask me any questions after, and you don't want to do it here, what you can do is that you can take on my personal details. Okay, this is a quote. Some parting words. Empathy is about finding echoes of another person yourself. Deep words. I didn't write those. But yeah, if you guys want to basically get in touch with me, you have any questions, you just want to just tap my brain, you want to have a conversation with me, meet up for coffee, whatever it may be, I'm open to anything. You can scan the QR code and get my personal details, or you can just write it down here. My email or mobile number is there. I'm happy to chat. really open to having any conversation related to gamification behavioral design. Go for it. And yeah, otherwise, thank you so much. Have a great day. And Ruel, do you want to close us off before I start, kicking people out?
Yeah.
Go for it.
All right. That was an insightful and wonderful session. Thank you so much to this. I hope everyone managed to take home some knowledge with yourself. I'd like to personally thank everyone for participating in this event. Please do look out for episode 3. We will definitely post it up across all our Common Ground channels. And I wish everyone a beautiful day ahead. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care and stay safe, all right, wherever you are in the world. Hope to see you guys in the next episode. Take care.